I'm not saying you will not succeed as a GRC person without technical knowledge, but having that technical knowledge will help you really to set yourself apart. Whether you are working in the care industry, you're lucky to be a BA, you're lucky to be a PM, whatever you're doing, just have that long-term focus and make sure that in the background, you are doing a lot of self-development along the lines of that thing that you really want. And in this case, GRC.
Tell me about this new automation in GRC, what it's all about, what it entails.
So you start from foundation, you graduate to being an implementer, and after being an implementer, you work for a couple of months or year. I think it's a 2-year requirement now, if I'm not wrong, and then you can go for the auditor. When an auditor is coming by the 28th of November, from the 1st of November, we're losing our sleep. We're losing our sleep, working extra hours, only to meet up with the requirement by the 28th and then go to bed again and wait till next year. Wow. But that's changing now. We want to be audit ready always. While being a technical person is not ultimately required to be successful within the GRC field, it does set you apart. It helps you not only to understand the business, but also to understand the technical languages.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another exciting edition of the podcast. Today, I'm being joined by Ola, who is a cybersecurity leader and consultant with over 20 years of experience in IT consulting, security operations, media technology, education, financial services, and telecommunications. He's expertly managed emerging information security risks for high-profile clients by developing, implementing, and maintaining a robust business-focused security strategy. Ola is highly knowledgeable in techniques and tools needed to plan, implement, and audit NIST cybersecurity frameworks, CIS security controls, and many others. He's also a specialist with experience in cloud security consulting, auditing, and delivering to the assurance compliance requirements of critical industry standards and regulation. In addition, Ola has delivered multiple information security management systems, ISMS, leveraging ISO 27001 standard. He recently, in May, achieved the Security Controls Framework Practitioner credential. Thank you very much, Ola, for joining me today. How are you doing?
Thank you. I'm very well. Very excited to join you guys today. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much. To begin with, I would like to understand, tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got into GRC.
First of all, I'd like to introduce myself as a father, a husband, before I even get into any GRC remit. So GRC for me, it's a lifetime of learning. For me, it started years ago when I was working at Nitel. I'm sure some people might be wondering, how does GRC relate to an environment like Nitel in Nigeria? But some of the technical bases that I learned over the years actually started from there. And when I left Nitel, I worked as an operations manager at a Nigerian bank, a second tier bank called IMB. I think it metamorphosed into Finland Bank subsequently. So not many Gen Zs will know what IMB Bank is, but there was such a bank as IMB Bank in Nigeria. And after that, I migrated to Europe and found myself partly in Sweden and then migrated to the UK. When I got to the UK, my first job was a software tester. So as a software tester, I was working with BSkyB, now the Sky News of this day. So we were working with the platform that deliver news, platform that support people to subscribe to different content that they provide. That was very insightful to see the back end of what people consume in the front end or on the TV or online, YouTube, and all the avenues you have in this world. I then moved from there. I worked partly as an assistant manager at KPMG. I would say KPMG is where I learned my GRC skills because it ranges from consultancy, face-to-face, being an auditor, being audited. So I saw it all early on. But the interesting part is even at KPMG, they had very solid, program of work that helps you to graduate from stage to stage. And I started with a basic framework called ISO 27001, which is the ISMS of this world. And I found out that ISMS or ISO 27001 is actually the fundamental baseline that you can have as a GRC consultant. So yeah, that's how my journey for GRC started.
Interesting. That's a very impressive background. I didn't know you worked at Nitel, which was the biggest telecommunications giant back in Nigeria.
Yeah.
Interesting. So speaking about GRC, I know we're going to discuss some trending topics in GRC, sort of automation, AI. But before we go into that, as a GRC consultant, what is it that you do for organizations? What exactly do you help them achieve?
Thank you. That's a very good question. Usually in the technology landscape, and as technology is evolving, there is this requirement from regulatory authorities asking companies, or in some cases, individual consulting firms, to meet up to some certain standards. And they define that in different forms. For example, within the EU, they have two legal instruments they use to deliver this. Sometimes they call it a directive when you talk about something like NIS2. Sometimes they call it a regulation when you talk about something like GDPR. But it doesn't matter the name they call it. It's just a set of rules that the regulatory authority are putting in front of the companies or organizations to meet up with. And usually behind this set of rules are very heavy fines. For example, the NIS2 directive requires that organization implement all the security controls ranging from supplier chain security to incident handling to AI controls, just name it. And all that is there for organizations to tap into is the fact that if they don't align to these requirements, they will end up with hefty fines. So there is a financial implication of not meeting up with this framework. Hence, companies engage consultants like myself to help them take them on the journey, see what their business requirements are, see what the requirements that is coming out of these external regulatory firms, and then plan a journey on how to meet these requirements.
So in summary, your job would be to sort of help them assess those requirements from a regulatory point of view and also help them plan how they would meet those requirements. Do you also have to help them implement those actual requirements in terms of control, or do you just tell them this is what you need to do and then you take a step back?
That's another great question. I actually have seen it all. So sometimes what I do is go into a company. So there are two sides to this. You are either the auditor or you are either the person being audited. So you are either the auditor or the auditee. So if you are the auditor, all you're doing is you're taking this standard of this framework and going into a supplier or a company and validating their controls against those set of requirements. However, when I go into companies, in most cases, I start off as helping them to implement the controls that meet those requirements. But very quickly, it graduates to, oh, you've implemented for us. We actually need support to even prepare for the audit. So it goes from not just consultancy, telling them how to do it, but also showing them how it is done and actually doing it as well.
That's very interesting, because that would help me narrow down my next question, which is around I think it's a very popular thing, especially among the migrant community, maybe because I'm one and coming from Nigeria. You see a lot of people talking about, well, if you want to get into cybersecurity and you don't want to do anything technical, GRC is the place for you to go. And now you're talking about a situation where you've helped implement some of these controls before auditing.
Yes.
And you need to have this technical knowledge before you can help implement this control. So are you saying, is GRC a technical role? Is it a core technical cybersecurity field, or am I mixing it up?
Another sound question. I would say the combination of skill set that I had before I eventually ventured fully into GRC over the years helped me. So while being a technical person is not ultimately required to be successful within the GRC field, it does sets you apart. It helps you not only to understand the business, but also to understand the technical languages. So imagine the business is putting requirements in front of you, and you need to relate with technical stakeholders to interpret this requirement and then to implement it. So if a requirement says all our data must be protected, and you go to the technical person and say all data must be protected, the technical person is wondering, what are you on about?
How do I protect all data?
What do you mean? How do I protect all data? But when you need to then speak their language and say, I need data protected at rest on a database and while in transit, traversing our network. that begins to make sense to them. And when you even go down to their technical knowledge or technical platforms and say, within the AWS platform, I want you to ensure that every bucket is encrypted. Every public facing item that you have, resource wise, is protected. Now you're speaking their language. So GRC consultants having technical background sets you apart, helps you to really bridge that gap quickly. I'm not saying you will not succeed as a GRC person without technical knowledge, but having that technical knowledge will help you really to set yourself apart.
Awesome. It just dawned on me that we started on a kind of high note, considering that you are a consultant with over 20 years of experience. But now bringing it down a little bit to someone who's just getting into the industry, a junior GRC analyst, now not a consultant.
Okay.
Do they have to be technical? What sort of skill do they need to succeed as a junior GRC analyst?
I would say people skill is very, very important. You wonder why people skill is important in GRC. The reason it's important is you need to understand stakeholder requirements, the personnel you're dealing with, whether it's the board level, whether it's the technical consultants, whether it's the business analyst, whether it's project managers. All of these people have different requirements, they have different inclinations, and they look up to you for guidance on the kind of controls that relate to their world. So as a GRC consultant, I say people skill is very important. While we also have delved on the technical side of things, I believe that if you emphasize your interpersonal skills very well, you can possibly almost, well, I say, bridge the gap in your technical knowledge based on relationship. That's why I said people relationships skill is really key.
So that's a very good point. People relationship, making sure you're able to hold conversation, because you would be interacting with lots of stakeholders within the business, the applications team, the engineering team,
Absolutely.
some of them technical, some of them not very technical. So again, to understand some of the controls that you're meant to audit as a GRC person, I would think it's only right for you to at least know what they do, even if you can't implement them. So I think a little bit of that technicality comes in again. It might not be core technical, but I think you would need to understand what you're going to audit for before you even say, oh, this is not compliant, this is compliant.
Yes.
Is that a clear statement?
Yeah, that's good. I like that question. And I can relate with this very well because I also did some work as a business analyst. Trust me, when I got into the UK as an immigrant, anywhere they said there's money, I just jump into it. Project management, there's money, do a little bit of project management. Software testing, there's money, do a little bit of that. But if you take the BA skill is requirement elicitation, right? They understand requirement and they go and implement it. That's a transferable skill to a GRC consultant. You take a requirement, you process it, you understand it, you do your own due diligence by making sure that at least the human English written text is something you comprehend yourself. And ahead of you engaging with different stakeholders, you should have a preset set of questions that you want to ask for each control. That will guide the conversation to the real things that you really want.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Before I talk about some of the transferable skills, a lot of because again, like you mentioned, and I think it's not unique to just yourself. A lot of us immigrants would definitely put our hand in a lot of things before we find that particular one we're going to stick in. And I know a lot of people starting with healthcare where they know the long term plan is to go into something maybe more tech oriented or tech inclined,
Yeah.
which is a good one.
Yeah.
So are there some transferable skills again for someone currently working in, say, for example, healthcare, but they in the mid to long term, say in 4 years' time, they want to switch into tech and they want to move into cybersecurity? What are some of the things they can start to do from now, learn or develop themselves in certain skills that would eventually be useful for them when they become a GRC analyst, if that's what they choose to go for?
Yeah, that's fantastic. So while I was working as a software tester, I knew even at that point that I want to go into GRC full time in the near future. So what I was doing in the background is to go for seminars, go for webinars, read different textbooks, take basic certification, especially the free ones. And that way I was inclining myself into the groove of being a GRC consultant, even while investing time in something that puts food on the table. But in the background, I was investing a lot of time reading books, attending seminars, attending webinars, and even going as far as writing certification. I completed my first certification, the CISM certification, while I was still a software tester. And I remember my colleagues then thinking, this guy is crazy. But I know when they see me now, they can relate to the fact that, okay, this guy had the plan really thought through, and it was just implementing stage by stage even while I was a software tester. So I would say anywhere you are now, whether you are working in the care industry, you're lucky to be a BA, you're lucky to be a PM, whatever you're doing, just have that long-term focus and make sure that in the background you are doing a lot of self-development along the lines of that thing that you really want. And in this case, GRC, I would say webinars. There are a lot of them online. There are a lot of content on YouTube. There are a lot of free schools offering free training. I even saw one on LinkedIn yesterday where a whole school opened up their whole year one year one cybersecurity training. So those are the kind of free tools or free resources that you can leverage and prepare yourself ahead. And when the opportunity comes, you are ready.
Interesting. You talked about CISM.
Yeah.
I don't know, because it's not my area of expertise. I don't know how sort of senior, how in terms of hierarchy, GRC certification, is that like an entry level certification, or is it something more senior, you would say?
CISM is just the Certified Information Security Manager. So what CISM does is to just give you some kind of a kind of all-round empowerment to understand how to manage security in a general sense. In fact, I would say it's a generalistic is a generalist kind of certification because it goes into different topics at the surface level and helps you to manage very small engagements. So CISSP, which is the next level to CISM, is a little bit more advanced. So for beginners, I would not even recommend going for CISSP. I would say basic things like CISM should do.
So now that we got that out of the way, you also mentioned at the beginning, you talked about ISO 27000 being the core of everything a GRC person does. I don't know if I've gotten that wrongly as well.
Yeah.
I know there are two different types of ISO 27001 certification. They call one the lead auditor, they call the other one lead implementer.
Yes.
So for someone who is planning, so currently I work in the health sector. I know in 4 years' time I want to go into GRC. I start with CISM, as you've mentioned. And then if I'm able to pass that, I can then move to something like the ISO courses. Are there like certifications around ISO or training schools or institution you would go to learn about these things before you even land a job in this?
Yeah, that's another good question. So yes, a company called BSI is standard. They do training, foundational training for those who want to learn ISO 27001. And you can just even do the awareness training, which is usually maybe half a day or 8 hours of the day. And that awareness training opens you up to all the kind of controls, the framework, the implementation strategies, almost a high level view of what ISO is all about. And once you've had that, I would expect that should trigger your interest, whether this is something for you or not for you. At that point, I strongly believe you will find out that this is not as difficult as it sounds or look from the outside. And then you can take the next level of development, which is to actually go for the certification. And the certification is just going for the training. And at the end of that training day, you write a test and that's it. So you start from foundation, you graduate to being an implementer. And after being an implementer, you work for couple of months or year. I think it's a 2-year requirement now, if I'm not wrong. And then you can go for the auditor.
Sounds good. Interesting. So let's do a little bit of deep dive now into GRC as a whole.
Okay.
So can you tell me about how organizations say used to practice GRC back in the days, how they do it now, and what you think it would be like in the future? So just going through that sort of trend, how
Sure.
GRC has evolved over time from your experience being in this profession for so long. What are some of the changes you've seen over time, and where do you think it's going in the near future?
Yeah. If you ask me now, what tool will be the most important tool that somebody wanting to do GRC 5 years ago for them to know how to use, I'll tell you is Excel. Why the Excel? Because Excel is being used to implement so many different aspects of the GRC requirements. Could it be set of controls, mapping to individuals, mapping to technology, mapping to implementation plans, and all of that. So you even find out some people that are so good at it have developed so many different kind of macros to be used within the Excel file. Now, that is manually doing GRC, and it's quite painful. It's very painful because before you even finish analyzing that Excel sheet, analyzing those controls, the actual control you are analyzing within that Excel sheet in real life, the control has shifted. You are assessing 500 users on your Excel sheet. And by the end of that week, there are users that have left the organization and there are users that have joined. So by the end of your analysis is incorrect. GRC now needed to evolve to as near real time as possible, moving away from the manual way of doing things to automated ways of doing things. Automating GRC is a whole new level for any GRC consultant. That is where any GRC consultant should aim to be.
Interesting. And now you've brought me to my next point, which was, I think, one key thing we wanted to cover in this conversation is automation in terms how it comes into GRC.
Yeah.
I believe for people who are starting out,
Yeah.
they don't have to go start from the olden days, the way you guys did things in the past. It looks like if you're planning to move into GRC, say in 3 years, you might as well start learning the sort of the futuristic GRC from now,
Yeah.
so that when you eventually get into the field. So tell me about this new automation in GRC, what it's all about, what it entails.
Yeah. So it's no news that AI is taking over the world. And if you're not into AI one way or the other, I think you are being left behind already. In the GRC world, AI is now being taken advantage of to help automate all the manual things we do with Excel sheet, with Word documents, with control tracking. AI is beginning to take over all of that work. I still appreciate the fact that a lot of people, I would say a lot of people, maybe 60 to 70% of people are still stuck in that world of manually monitoring controls. But AI is one aspect of technology that is taking over the world, and GRC is not being left out. I am particularly interested in this aspect of GRC because I have a baby project that I'm doing now that I'm taking stakeholders through a journey of asking them what are their requirements, process their requirement, give them a set of automated controls, and then they can go and implement those controls, and also show them how to validate those controls in a live environment, not once, but on a continuous basis, so that at the end of the day, they end up with what we call the continuous control monitoring platform, where controls are not just validated as a one point in time thing, but as a continuous thing. So that what that transfers to is that you are audit ready any day, anytime. So you're not panicking that an auditor is coming in next week. And that's the way we used to do it before. When an auditor is coming by the 28th of November, from the 1st of November, we're losing our sleep. We're losing our sleep, working extra hours, only to meet up with the requirement by the 28th and then go to bed again and wait till next year.
Wow.
You know? But that's changing now. We want to be audit ready always.
Every day.
Yeah.
Wow. Interesting. You know, when you talked about the continuous control monitoring platform,
Yeah.
I would call that CCMP. I don't know if anything like that exists.
CCM, yeah.
CCM.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. So it actually then made me realize that actually what you said is very true, because even in organizations where I've worked, it is when the auditors are coming that we start doing the run around and start panicking. Auditors are coming tomorrow, prepare for it. You know,
Yeah.
a platform like this would ensure that every day you're seeing the real-time state of your organization in terms of
Absolutely.
control implementation and where you stand.
Yeah.
So if there's something to fix,
Yeah.
you fix it. So is AI taking the job of an auditor in this situation? Because the auditor was supposed to come in to check all these controls, but now you have a system that's constantly checking for those controls. Is this in place? Is this encryption there?
Yeah.
Is this encrypted at rest? is AI gradually going to replace the auditor? Not.
I think the answer to that is no, because I'm hoping that no matter what AI does, it doesn't replace us, right? But the way to ensure that AI doesn't replace you is to stay abreast of what AI can do and how you can use it to become more efficient. So for me, as a consultant, implementing a GRC for a stakeholder, all I have to do is to ensure that all their controls are automated. And by automated, it means that when the auditor is coming in, we just present the auditor with a dashboard and then take the auditor through the rationale behind each numbers. And for many of the controls, maybe it's amber, is green, is red, whatever it is, we have explanation, contextual explanation behind those figures that helps the auditor know that we are on top of things. I can give a very practical example. Say, for example,
Please.
you have ISO set of controls that you need to implement. Let's take uh, identity and identity and access management. And one of the things you usually do there is to review those with admin account or admin privileges, how they are logging in, whether they are using MFA or not. Now, if you have a IAM tool like Okta, for example, all you need to do to automate that process is to make sure that Okta, the telemetry coming out of Okta, which is just your log files, coming out of Okta, are being transposed or normalized into a form that these automated tools can consume.
That's a CC.
Exactly. So the CCM tool stays in between the human written controls and what the actual logs coming from the system are. So it takes this human control, the telemetry from the systems, do a mapping on them and presents you with the dashboard. I think that's cooler than using Excel.
Fantastic. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And is there any popular CCM tool that you'd like to mention so people can maybe research? Are these things, I know these things are still emerging.
Yeah.
Are there like industry leader? Who's leading in this space right now? Is there any popular names that comes to mind?
I'm currently engaging with a very smart company called REG Scale. This company, one of the things that sets them apart is the NIST framework. They were part of those that helped NIST to develop their cybersecurity framework and prepare NIST controls for automation. So that gave them a head start into the automation of the CCM platform. Although they are working in collaboration with other companies, but I figured that they are a step ahead of so many other competition, and they are doing amazing things with that platform.
What did you call the name again?
Scale, Reg Scale, REG Scale.
Oh, interesting. So yeah, you heard it first. You heard it here first. If you're trying to stay on top of the chain in GRC, you probably want to start exploring tools, the CCM tools like RegScale. I'm sure there are going to be others out there, but yeah, that's probably one. Now let's go to my next question. Do all organizations require GRC? Is it something only for big organizations?
Very good question. I would say no. So if you're not operating in a regulated environment, if you're not working in financial services, you're not working with any critical data like PII, you're not working with anything that has to do with maybe social impact. If your platform goes down, then people cannot go to hospital. If you're not working in any of those critical environments, I don't believe you need any GRC commitment. But this is where it gets tricky. The regulatory authorities, when they make these rules, whether directly or indirectly, you are being covered by those rules. And what that means is that even if the regulatory requirement does not cover you directly, you may be providing service to another company that the regulatory requirements cover. So indirectly, you are covered as well, because the person you're supplying this service to will do their diligence that gets to you to say, oh, for competition's sake and to keep our minds at rest, we need you to ensure that you are encrypting your data, you are protecting your platforms, and you are using the latest technology tools to keep our data secure. So you see what I said, that even if you are not directly impacted, in a way you will be indirectly impacted. So there's no hiding place really.
Interesting.
Yeah.
You know, GRC has always popped up as some of the, I think when you look at the shortage skills list in the UK, for example, you would see some things role skills related to GRC. Is there I'm guessing there is a lot of demand for competent GRC practitioners, either analysts, consultants. Now, before we draw out a proper roadmap for what a career path would look like for someone who wants to come into GRC, what are some of the challenges you think companies or industries are actually facing themselves out that's constantly wanting them to get more GRC people on board? Why the skill is now being identified as a shortage skill in the UK, for example?
Yeah, another great question. The problem is that the way they churn out this regulation is so frequent that companies struggle to meet up. So they're still trying to implement for example, the ISO 27001 2022 version. Some companies are still on the journey to implement 2022. Midway through implementing 2022 version of the ISO 27001, you've thrown NIS 2 at them. And now they are juggling ISO 27001 and they are juggling NIS 2. And somewhere down the line again, you throw DORA at them. I mean, so it becomes a constant juggling for these companies. And the only way they can scale at this current time is to throw people at the problem for just meeting the short-term requirements. But some futuristic companies are already thinking ahead, saying, okay, we cannot continue to throw money and people at this problem. Let's find a way of implementing a baseline, bringing me back to where we started, implementing a set of baseline, maybe using an ISMS like ISO 27001, implementing that baseline, then anything that comes on top, you will validate it against your baseline and you only deal with the delta of what changed in NIS2, what changed to my baseline in DORA, what changed to my baseline in GDPR. That's the only sane way to go ahead or implement this.
Awesome. I was going to ask you before we talk about the career path, technology is constantly evolving at a very fast pace. Now, as a GRC consultant, you're trying to ensure controls are implemented, for example. How do you stay up to date with the fast trending or fast pacing technologies evolving and knowing what those things are so you might find yourself in an organization that is working in a full cloud native environment while some organizations are still using on-prem, now for an organization that still runs on-prem, they're probably using VMware for virtualization, whilst another organization is full AWS or full Azure. Now, you coming in as a consultant, you need to know a little bit about how virtualization is done on premise before you can audit them and give a proper report. Same thing, you have to know about AWS and Azure to be able to understand what they're talking about once they start talking about serverless and all of that. Yeah. How do you stay up to date with a lot of this information?
That's another smart question. Back in the days when I'm doing any audit work and I have to cover technical requirements, I make excuses and say, oh, this is not my area of expertise. So I just gloss over it. And what that meant was there could be problem in the implementation of those controls. But because I lack the right skill set to deal with them, I tend to stay away from doing it. So what I figured out quickly is that I will not be competent to review a control if I don't understand the basic requirements of that control. And how do I do that? I try to do an investigation about the company that I'm auditing. What is their technology stack like? Where are they hosting their data? What are the people using for their endpoint device landscape? I need to know those basic things so that when I'm interpreting a control, I will be doing it in the context of that company. And my communication with them will make sense even to them rather than use the one size fit all approach that many people do. You need to build these controls, their implementation, and their review in the context of the organization you are interviewing or auditing.
Wow. That makes sense. I think that way, if you do that, it definitely gives you an edge compared to someone coming in with a set of 50 standard questions that they're meant to ask. And you're like, you either answer these questions or you are failed, Yeah, I think that would be more. So now let's switch back a little bit to sort of the enthusiasts, the aspiring ones, or someone who's coming in from a non-technical background? Again, we've talked about people working in the health sector. How can they leverage the use of AI, since AI is almost available to anyone today? ChatGPT is there, Grok is there. How can they leverage this newfound gem, the gold of AI, to sort of prepare or get into GRC?
I'll say just get involved. Why do I say that? Just even get yourself a modest chatting module, like a modest like ChatGPT. It's a very decent one. I do subscription based model. If you are just living on the free version, you may not get much. Sit down in front of a chat GTP instance and even type in, as a non-technical person, how do I prepare myself for GRC? Just even do that alone. You start seeing a lot of content, a lot of guidance on what people have already done, on how they've done it, and how you can also adopt it for yourself. Speaking to myself now, what I did in the baby project I'm working on is I want a situation whereby any person, whether it's a project manager, product owner, a leadership person, somebody in the C-suite, or a pure technical person, they will sit down with this chatbot I'm developing, give the chatbot a set of input, the project they are working on, whether the data is hosted in a in AWS, the location of the hosting, whether it's EU or outside of EU, and several other contexts. And what this chat GPT model will be able to do for them is to spit out a set of controls mapped to ISO, mapped to GDPR, mapped to several other framework, and ready to use. The beauty of this is also it will give them implementation steps on how to implement this technically. So as a GRC person, you're sitting in front of an AI chat model and it's giving you all this answer. It makes you intelligent when you go on the field. So I'll say that's why I say just get involved. Just ask stupid questions and you start carving your way slowly but surely.
Interesting. I always advise people as well, maybe if you ask an individual a question that sounds foolish to you, you might feel like they would judge you, or,
Yeah.
they would look down on you because you're asking a foolish
Yeah.
question. But the beauty of this platform, the AI platform, is
It's
that
by
they won't
yourself.
judge you.
Yeah.
You can ask as dumb questions as you think, and you will definitely get something reasonable back in return. Which
Yes.
you talked about going into the field, working in the industry. Are there remote job opportunities for people working in GLC? Do you have to, because there's a lot of interaction. I know we now interact remotely as well, but do you always have to be in person to be on top of your game, or can you do your work remotely comfortably?
It's possible to do remote GRC work. However, from my experience, I noticed that companies will prefer where at least they have some level of one-to-one interaction. But in terms of answering that question straight ahead, it is possible, but the opportunities are limited for remote GRC consultancy work.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you can't maybe be in Nigeria and get remote gig as a GRC analyst. And in fact, that makes me think about geography.
Yes.
When when you're trying to become a GRC consultant, are there some geographically restricted knowledge where when you learn something that only works within a certain geography and doesn't work in others? So a GRC consultant from Nigeria, can they come in here and fits perfectly well in the UK industry, continue their work, or do you have to relearn some new framework, new regulations specific for that country?
The fundamentals need to be there. I am not too familiar with the security frameworks in use in Nigeria, and that's because I've not had to do core GRC work in Nigeria. But I'm very familiar with the ones applicable in Europe because I'm in the Europe. And of recent, I'm consulting for some American companies. I am able to do that because I have the basics in place. So, but this also comes with stretching yourself a little bit. For example, in the US, they have framework that are at national level. They have framework that are state level. At a national level, you have something like the FedRAMP, Federal Risk Automation, the one they use to validate cloud service providers. It's called FedRAMP. At a privacy level in California, for example, they have CCPA. So I'm seated here in the UK, but I'm learning what is applicable in California. Why? Because I'm consulting for a company that has presence in America. So once the fundamentals are there, you can leverage those fundamentals and learn this new thing. So I would say a GRC consultant must be ready to open up their horizon, because the more you open up to this different framework, the more opportunities that will come your way.
We talked about AI and how AI is the new or, emerging technology. Everyone is infusing AI into their technology. Is there some form of governance for AI itself that's currently in play? Like, is someone looking to regulate and govern the use of AI as a GRC person? Is that a new niche you also have to then develop yourself in? Because you might have to audit maybe AI models at some point, or you're probably doing it already that I don't know about. Is that something in the GRC space right now?
Absolutely. So remember at the beginning, I said there are some legal instruments that the EU, for example, use to drive their requirements. One of them, I said, is called regulation, the likes of GDPR. Another is called directive, the like of NIS2. Another example of a regulation is the EU AI Act. EU AI Act is currently at the review stage and has been released for industry consultation. So what that means is that this is about to land. So as a GRC consultant, all I need to do is to stay abreast of what AI Act is saying, talking about responsible use, removal of bias, make sure I understand all the controls they are talking about, so that as soon as it's landing, I am also ready to speak the language of what the act is talking about and support companies that are looking to implement it.
That's really impressive, because I was looking at it, unlike some of us who work in the core technical space where we're only worried about maybe the instance running, the code working, compiling. You also then have to think, for someone in your space, you have to worry about regulations that are happening around the world. And all of these things are important to the work you do as well to stay abreast.
Yes, it's almost similar to the work of a doctor. I remember one of my cousins who came to visit in the UK some time ago. Within the span of 3 months that he stayed with us, I was working on 2 different exams. And I was reading another policy, another framework, and he's wondering, how is this work different from the work of a doctor where you're always reading? But that's the beauty of it. When you stay up to date with what is trending in GRC, you remain relevant and you are ready to provide value. You are ready to deliver value. So you have to be on top of it. You have to stay relevant. You have to read. You have to look out for what's trending, what's on the horizon. And these are open knowledge. It's not like you have to even pay for them. It just takes you to be a bit more diligent to seek this knowledge in a proactive way and prepare yourself for when the opportunities will land.
I know you talked about using chatbots to ask questions, and you also mentioned the British BSI you talked
BSI,
about when we
yes.
started. Are there some other places or resources one could use to learn? I know there are courses on Udemy as well, but maybe something more focused or centric towards GRC. Are there some useful resources people should be aware of?
Yes, I forgot maybe I'll send a link to a GRC model that I had within YouTube. It's a free set of training that somebody has put there. I found it very, very intuitive. So it taking you from basics to at least an intermediate level. Just in your living room, you go from basic person with no knowledge all right up to being an intermediate person that can hold conversation and deliver even value at the beginner's level. So yes, I'll recommend people going to YouTube and finding some reputable firms, not just anybody, reputable. And the way to validate this is to go into the comments section, see what people are saying about it, and if there is a lot of thumbs up for it, then most likely it's a good resource.
Speaking of education, since you touched on that, I know there are lots of small startups here in the UK where, especially providing educational services to people, teaching them GRC. And the promise, which I've always struggled to understand, is from zero to hero. You see some headlines like become a GRC analyst in 6 months, become a GRC expert in 6 months from zero experience. Do you think these are fair? Are these just marketing headlines, or are these fair assessment? Is this a possibility of you being able to become from absolutely zero, not knowing anything about GRC, to becoming someone that an organization would be willing to pay and employ in 6 months? Are these realistic goals, or are these people just trying to click bait and make people buy their courses?
I wouldn't like to kill people's business, but I would like to use myself as an example. For me to get to this stage of, I consider myself an expert in GRC. For me to get to this point took me over 20 years. Put that side by side with somebody telling you that you can become an expert in 6 months. I think maybe you get your answer there straight away.
Yeah.
But I will also say what these people do is to give you some kind of fast-tracked, condensed knowledge within a short space of time. What you do with that knowledge is then up to you. You can get this condensed knowledge, maybe lucky enough to hit a beginner's job, but the journey has only just started for you. You now need to stay loyal to information gathering, to training, to attending webinars, to attending seminars, to taking certification. That's the only way that this immediate shot of 6 months training can give you value consistently going forward. But yes, I would say it's possible to train somebody for 6 months. They get a beginner's job, but it's, as the name implies, it's a beginner's job. So the journey just began and you need to really keep up with learning.
And speaking of beginner jobs, since this was probably a very long time for you, what are some of the day-to-day expectations from someone who is a entry-level GRC analyst? What would the organization expect them? Would they expect the same level of understanding and knowledge as they would from you in terms of control mapping, understanding control implementation, or what are the expectations from a junior GRC analyst?
I think what they will typically expect is for that person to at least have done their basic due diligence in understanding that this company that I work for, what are the 3, 4, or 5 frameworks that they are working towards? It could be a combination of ISO 27001, GDPR, maybe DORA, maybe NIS2, maybe in America, maybe CCPA or FedRAMP or anything like that. At least they expect you to know that as a company, we are bound by GDPR. As a company, we are bound by NIS2. As a company, we are bound by DORA. That's the most basic thing that they expect you to learn. Then the next level to that is to understand the high level controls within those requirements. So the high level controls within GDPR, for example, is mostly about protecting PII. So if you're working in as a starter and they are talking about protecting PII data and you are still lost, then maybe that's not a place
Something
for
is
you.
wrong. Yeah.
So I'll say
I completely
at
agree with
least
that.
know the basics,
Understand those fundamentals. It's like someone
fundamentals.
getting into cybersecurity, not understanding CIA triad
Exactly.
and least privilege and things like those
Yes,
are like the bone of, the foundation
that
that
you
everyone
built.
should know irrespective of. Yeah, that
Yeah.
makes sense. And again, you talked about GDPR and that reminds me, I think a massive opportunity that might have now opened up, especially in Nigeria. Again, as an immigrant, I know that a lot of people who listen and watch my episode online are still in Nigeria. And the opportunity is not only for, I'm guessing the opportunity is not only for those who are abroad. Recently, the Nigerian data regulation, data protection, I don't know if it's still a regulation or it's now an act. Well, the equivalent of GDPR in Nigeria was passed into law. So that would make it an act then if it's been passed already.
Mhm.
And I guess that would then automatically push a lot of organizations that were initially not regulated into that scope of regulation because now some of them manage sensitive data that they never really cared about until this law is now passed.
Yeah.
And that would open up, again, like you mentioned when we started, opportunities for GRC analysts or consultants because now organizations would need to bring in some of these consultants to say, hey, come and help us check our environment. Are we compliant with this law? Because there are lots that are big fines on, non-compliance or non-conformity with some of those. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you hope, like for laws like this, when they are passed in countries like Nigeria, what opportunities arise for newbies or people who are who want to get into GRC?
Yeah. I would say, at this point, let me talk about what we call the security controls framework. The security controls framework is an open source effort that some people have taken time, effort, and even their money. I just don't understand how that resource is free. If anybody listening to this can Google security controls framework, and what you find is some people have taken time to map the NIST framework, for example, NIST critical security framework, the cybersecurity framework, for example, version 2.0 or ISO 27001. So all these other controls or requirements. So within that document or within that platform, you see a mapping of ISO to GDPR, ISO to NIS2, ISO to DORA. And if what you're telling me has landed already, the Nigerian regulation, it would be there. I can guarantee you it will be there. So there will be a mapping of ISO to those requirements in Nigeria. And bingo, what does that mean? That means you already have a head start on what Nigeria is requiring. And because you have this baseline that you know already, you can confidently say, oh, I can help you deliver this based on what I already know.
Interesting. Let's talk about what a typical career growth path looks like for a GRC person, someone coming into the GRC field. From an entry level point, where is there a peak to the career? What's the growth level like? From how do you go from being a junior to sort of the expert level you are in today?
I would say be a learner, be an addict of learning, always willing to evolve. Because if you are the expert today in a particular GRC field and the controls or the framework you're working with evolve and you don't evolve. For example, ISO 27001, the previous version to this was 2013. Imagine you consider yourself as an expert on the 2013 version and you never evolved into the 2022 version. Somehow you're out of the game. So I would say be an addict of learning. And that's a way to stay ahead and to stay relevant.
Thank you very much for that wonderful answers you've provided to a lot of the questions. There's this section in this part of the podcast where I would like to say, I will talk about some of the misconceptions of things people say about GRC, and then you tell me if it's a myth or a fact. So if it's pretty much true or false.
Okay.
So I'll start with the first one, which is GRC is only relevant for large enterprises, not small or medium-sized businesses. Is this true or false?
That's a big false. It depends on your scope. It depends on your impact. It depends on what you do. Because if your business has a strong impact or covers EU people, they call it EU subject, you're processing EU data, definitely GDPR becomes applicable. It doesn't matter whether you are a 5-man band or a 500-man band.
Yeah, that was what I was going to say. So you could be a 10-man company and still be covered
by that. Yes.
Some people could be working in a 100-man company. Maybe it's a block manufacturing company with over 100 employees. You don't deal with any sensitive data. You might not be covered, and a 5% company would be.
Absolutely. Yes.
Interesting. Okay, the next one is you need a technical background to succeed in GRC. Is this a myth or a fact?
This is a difficult one. I would say you don't have a middle ground for this one. I'll say it's a myth. I'll say it's a myth because you can build the technical skill you need on the go. Remember I said if you're an addict learner, you can always build a skill as you go, but you need to be committed to it and definitely evolve over time. In terms of whether you need technical skill, yes, you do need technical skill that can be developed and it will set you apart.
Next one is AI and automation in GRC will replace most human jobs in the field.
Yes, yes.
Oh, AI is going to replace everyone.
I predict not everyone. Did I miss that part? Everyone.
No, I know not everyone. I just say will it replace most human jobs, not everyone.
Most human jobs, including GRC roles. And that's why any smart GRC consultant should align to AI use to make a GRC more efficient. So if you're selling yourself as a GRC consultant that leverages AI to get their job done, I think you'll still be relevant.
GRC is just about ticking boxes for compliance and doesn't add real business value.
That's false. That's false. Where GRC is going on is to become an enabler, a business enabler, not even a cost center. Because with the advent of CCM tools, you can get some tools that will automate what 10, 15, 60 people army can do for you in days, not months. So yeah, that's a big false.
Implementing AI in GRC is too expensive for most organizations.
That's a false as well. RegScale have a commitment on their website that says they can help you implement between 60 to 70% of the requirements of the FedRAMP within 60 days. The minimum time it will take an organization that has 6 people will be maybe over a year. And they will do it over 60 days. So that means what you will need to fund the tool that will do this work in 60 days is probably the paycheck of 2 people.
Salary of 2, yeah, exactly. And then considering that you could employ 6 people that would do it for the whole year, definitely, the costs would be justified.
Absolutely, yeah.
Interesting. Okay, the next one is GRC roles are boring and involves mostly paperwork.
It used to be boring. I got out of the boring bits and now I'm doing some more funky and exciting stuff. So that's not true.
Okay, because I know a lot of people talk about GRC people just sitting in the office reading paper, and you talked about Excel again in the beginning, so it made it look like, oh, am I just gonna sit down
with Excel
and face with loads of paper? And okay. So that's a myth. These days, it can be very interesting depending on your level and how much knowledge or how much you're willing to get into the space.
Absolutely. Just get yourself involved in the trendy part and you'll find it very exciting.
Okay. And GRC is only about cybersecurity and doesn't impact other part of the business. Is that correct?
That's not correct, because if you think about it, even in the letters of the word, governance, risk, and compliance. So the governance level is talking about the people, the management, and the sign-offs that you need. Then this risk is talking about the threat landscape, the actors that are acting against you. And the compliance is talking about the framework and the regulatory aspects that you need to deal with. So it's a combination of technical and non-technical. Okay.
And my last myth or fact question for today is, once a GRC framework is set up, it doesn't need much updating or attention.
That's a myth, because you definitely need to stay on top of it. The controls or the policies that you set up today may need some tweakings. For example, you set up a policy that says passwords must be alphanumeric, 8 characters long, and GDPR come along and say this needs to change to 12 characters. So if you set it one time and leave it, it becomes irrelevant when GDPR changes it to 12. So you need to keep up your policy that way. So it's not a one-time fix and that's it. You have to really stay on top of it.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Deola, for spending. It's been over an hour already, and I know we've exhausted our time. You've pretty much answered all the questions I have, and in a very detailed fashion. But before I let you go, I have a closing tradition on this podcast where I ask my guests a very simple question. With everything you know today, everything you've learned in the past 20 years in this field, what is the advice you would give to yourself 10 years ago? If you could go back in time, say 10 years before now, what would you change anything in the way you've learned, the way you studied, or even some decisions you've made in the context of the work you do today?
I think maybe finding my feet quicker will have been better for me, because in those days, I just ran to where the money is. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do long term. So if you remember, I said if they say project management is giving money and paying well, I'll go and do project management certification. If BA is paying, I'll go and do BA certification. If software testing is paying, I go and do. So I wasted about 3 or 4 years doing all of that, where I could have channeled my effort into what I think I really want to do and just go for it, regardless of whether it's giving me immediate return, in as much as you know that, okay, it's viable, is relevant, and it can put food on the table, pay your bills, and keep you happy, and help you to stay fulfilled. I think you should go for it rather than just jumping from here to there.
Awesome. Yeah. That was a very good one. Thank you very much. And if anyone wants to connect with you or maybe ask you questions, is this something you're open to, or can they reach out to you or connect to you on LinkedIn?
Please, I'll be glad if you can share my email. You look for me on LinkedIn, oladipo.david. Please find me, reach out. I'm always happy to help. I have a few people I'm mentoring, and I'm always open to helping people because I got help along the way myself.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Ola. I really appreciate your time today. I've learned so much about GRC, especially with automation and AI coming in place, which is really, really interesting. I guess it's interesting days ahead for everyone in the GRC space, and also a lot of opportunity for anyone who's just considering going into GRC. Yeah. This is the end of our session today. I hope we've been able to answer some of the questions you're having as a viewer, and hopefully at some point we can bring Ola back again. If there are more questions, you put them in the comment section, and if I'm able to bring him back, I'll definitely bring him back. But this is definitely a gem of a session. Thank you very much, Ola, and bye for now.
It's a pleasure. Thank you. Bye-bye.